Now we will move on to the second speaker who will be speaking to us on anti-caste movements and abolition of untouchability. We have with us Dr. Devasahayam. It's my honor, privilege, and pleasure to introduce Dr. Devasahayam. He's a stalwart. He is a very well-known Dalit theologian. He was the Bishop of Chennai, Madras Diocese of Church of South India, an expert and who has worked very strongly on Dalit issues. For me, very personally, he was my first boss, I should say, or he was the chairperson of Student Christian Movement of India in 1996 of the North Tamil Nadu area when I was the program secretary. And I also had the privilege of learning under him in the YMCA training department when I did the YMCA training in 1995. So very honored, so very privileged to have you, Dr. Deva. So we are happy to hear from you, and the floor is yours. Over to you.
Dr. Joshua, the moderator, Mr. John Matthew, the host, and friends. Indeed, I am thankful for the opportunity given to me to share on this topic, anti-caste movement and abolition of untouchability. My presentation is in three parts. The first is the profile of untouchability, and the second is the encounter of missionaries and untouchables, and finally, the contemporary church and untouchability. First, profile of untouchability. I am first starting with a case study of practice of untouchability in the RSS. As much as today, this is a case study related to one Mr. Banwar Megwanshi, who is a Dalit and who rose to the height of being the district chief in the RSS. And he has written his autobiography, I Could Not Be a Hindu, the story of a Dalit in the RSS. He narrates that after the Babri Masjid was demolished, the people who were killed, their ashes were taken to different places with the saints and sons, BJP leaders, and all the other members of the BJP branch. And it was also taken to his own village, and probably the first time very successful procession was taken in that village. And at the end of the meeting, I'll just read to you, he invited the friends to his home for a meal which he had prepared, though his father was objecting to it. And when he invited them, there was hesitation. The acting district chief of Seva Bharati took me aside and said, "Friend, you are aware of the inequalities in our society. Despite all the efforts of the Sangh, Hindu society has not become one. As far as we ourselves are concerned, we would sit down with you any day and eat from the same plate. But today there are sadhu sons and others also here. They will be really upset if without informing them, we give them food from a lower caste home. They would be so angry they might leave. Why don't you pack the food and have it put in the car? We will feed them in the next village." His words turned me to stone. Had you cut me, I would not have bled. My mind was buffeted by a storm of thought. No words would come to my tongue. I felt defeated in my own home. My father had won, but it was a Sangh that struck the blow. I experienced fully what it meant to be of a lower caste. I thought, here I am, a disciplined Swayamsevak, a passionate Swayamsevak, a district office chief. If this can happen to me, what kind of intolerable behavior must the rest of my community face? For the first time in my life that day, I stepped aside from my Hindu identity and started seeing the world like a person from a lower caste. My friend Purushottam, a Brahmin who had gone with the Asti Kalash Yatra, returned to my village to return the kettle in which the kheer had been sent. Purushottam said that food I had sent was thrown out on the road just before, and the night's meal was provided from a home of a Brahmin, Ram Swarup Sharma, very late at night. He said, if you don't believe me, come and see for yourselves. Some of it must still be lying there. We set off on cycles to Bhagwanpura, and I saw with my own eyes there on the side of the road the food I had sent them home lying scattered about, and the crows, kids, ants, and the dogs, with no distinction amongst themselves, were feeding on it. My heart was broken. This is something that has happened, say, around just a few years ago. And of course, about the untouchables, Gandhi said, socially they are lepers, economically they are worse than slaves, religiously they are denied entrance to places we miscall house of God. They are denied the use on the same terms as caste people of the public roads, public hospitals, public wells, public taps, public parks, and the like. In some cases, their approach within the measured distance is a social crime, and in some other rare enough cases, their very sight is an offense. They are relegated for their residence to a worse quarters of cities and villages where practically they get no social service. Caste Hindu lawyers and doctors will not serve them as they do other members of the society. Brahmins will not officiate at their religious functions. And one of the freedom fighter, Gokhale, says, untouchability is so deeply deplorable that it constitutes a grave blot on our social arrangement. We may touch a cat, we may touch a dog, we may touch any other animal, but the touch of these human beings is pollution. And so complete is the mental degradation of these people that they themselves see nothing bad in such treatment to resent that they acquiesce in it as though nothing better that was their due. And foundations for caste system and untouchability are laid by Hinduism. M.N. Srinivas would say Brahminism, which is the appropriate name for Hinduism, is nothing but caste system. Minus caste, Hinduism is dead. When caste disappears from India, Hinduism will also disappear. And Hindu social order does not admit the principle of liberty, equality, human dignity, and sacredness of human being and fraternity. It is against the untouchables, unlike in other religions which are pro-poor and the oppressed. The practice of caste system is a virtue in Hinduism, whereas in other religions it's a weakness. Equality, the principle of equality, is that which distinguishes all the Indian religions from Hinduism because all the other religions are egalitarian religions. And caste and untouchability are one and inseparable. Ambedkar would say the caste is a byproduct of caste system. There will be outcasts as long as there are castes. Nothing can emancipate the outcast except the destruction of caste system. And the Dalit reality, I'm not elaborating for want of time, but I'm just highlighting Dalit community, the untouchable community, is a community being shamed. It's based on birth, therefore immutable, and it is a form of inherited inequality. And shaming through violence with impunity. Indian crime statistics gives us the detailed report of the crimes committed against Dalits each day, even each hour. Original inhabitants of this country have been exiled in their own land, reduced to servitude and social exclusion, and they're shamed with stigma of pollution. They are untouchables, unapproachable, and unseeable. They are shamed by imposed poverty due to imposition of hereditary occupation and denial of education. They are shamed by non-recognition and denial of power, and Dalit shame as a psychological consequence of caste and untouchability. They are also shamed in the church. Now, the second section, missionaries, encounter of missionaries and the untouchables. The later part of 19th century was a period of great transformation due to education and social change. Naturally, that was a period when nationalistic fervor was reigning. So there was a common interest of attaining freedom from the British. Yet at the same time, there were smaller interest groups that were also fighting for establishing their own rights. And missionaries, when they came to India, they had a dilemma about caste because they recognized Indian society is caste-based and they have to come to terms with caste because sometimes it was seen as helpful mechanism because if some group people from one caste become Christians, then naturally in the neighboring villages, the same caste people became Christians. But at the same time, it was also seen as a hindrance because if one caste comes into the church, and particularly the untouchables, then the other caste people would not come into the church. There were many missions in India, And therefore, there were divergent responses to caste. And, from the Orthodox Church, from the Catholic Church, from the Lutheran Church, from the Baptist Church, from the Anglo-Saxon missionaries. And it was also not all of them have taken a clear stance against caste system as something that is incompatible with Christianity. And the challenge was also made difficult due to religious authority, because it is a religious system, and due to economic interest, because the landlords were against the conversion to Christianity. And there was a social psychology, and in the social psychology, social pressure, and there was also internal resistance within the church. Probably we cannot claim that the church was really out to abolish the caste system, because very within the structures of the church, there were those who were supporting caste system, and thereby they certainly have contributed to anti-caste actions by integration in schools. So social revolution took place in the schools first. Integration worship were able to worship in the same church, and church was serving as the anti-caste space and presence of the missionaries in Dalit settlements. And they came to proclaim the gospel and aimed at salvation of the people, but they became advocates for the rights of the Dalits, and they encouraged intercaste marriages. And of course, there was some appraisal of caste values from Christian perspective, and said Christianity and caste cannot go together on the basis of the principle of, on the doctrine of creation in God's image with equality and dignity, and breathing of the spirit, which makes the idea of pollution untenable. Christ's atoning work negates the doctrine of karma and nature of the church as one norm of one of fraternity and not segregation, and Christian presence of loving God and loving people. And it influenced certainly several reformers like Pule and Mr. K. Nadarajan, one of the historians, would say the social wisdom of this, the fear of the missionary has contributed to the social wisdom of our country. So they were instrumental in bringing anti-untouchability legislations like Caste Disabilities Removal Act 1850, Indian Penal Code 1862, where possession of slaves is a crime, and Article 17 of the Constitution. And I want to focus on the Dalit mass movements. I think missionaries, though, when they were hesitant to address the issue of the caste and Dalits, it was a mass movement that proved to be Christ's way to India's heart. Thousands and thousands have joined the church, taking him of their own initiative. So there was a rise in Dalit consciousness, and they were searching for alternatives through religion, because all other avenues of social mobility are closed for the Dalits, like urbanization, industrialization, or Sanskritization, and so on. In search of personal dignity and self-respect, improved social justice, greater sense of community, protection from oppressors, education, and improved social justice were some of the motives behind their conversion to Christianity. So therefore, after they have come into Christianity in large numbers, the church took the concern of the untouchables much more seriously and started addressing them. Gospel was perceived as good news by the untouchables because the love for the last and the least attracted them. And missionary was seen as a friend, because they not only converted people, but they have taken their rights as their burden and responsibility in fighting with the civil authorities. And they were also happy that the mission theology was widening. They came to save individuals, but now they have moved to save, liberate the systems. And there was transformation through the mass movements. They gave new self-identity, rejection of inferiority complex, respect in the community through character and cleanliness of habits, desire for self-improvement. And Moshini says, we were untouchables, and now missionaries came, gave us education, made us doctors and nurses, people come soliciting us to touch them. And we were not permitted to enter into the temple, but now missionaries came, gave us education, made us sing in the churches. We were unseeable. But then now because of the education, we come up in positions and people wait at the gate to say, can we see this gentleman? So I can go on saying it has impact on the churches because the churches have come forward to address the Dalit issues and work towards their empowerment. And it also became the first Dalit movement, Christian Dalit mass movement. Christian mass movement has become the Dalit movement, and people recognize the value of conversion as a instrument of struggle. And it also had affected the wider society because others also realized that they need to take into account the concern of Dalits in the changing times. Finally, contemporary church and untouchability. I would like to modify the title slightly differently. Anti-caste movement and abolition of untouchability need to be changed as anti-caste movement and uplifting of Dalits. Article 17, of course, it was said abolition of untouchability. State ways do not change folk ways. And there was transition of leadership from missionaries to upper caste leaders, and the Dalit church started working with upper caste ideology, never addressed the question of caste, though there is a concern expressed for the Dalits. Institutional interests always outweighed the concern for justice and the marginalized. Mr. P. Rajagopal says, bishops have sent forth their decrees against it. Missionary conferences have written minutes against it. Christian churches have grown in moral and spiritual knowledge, but caste is still in their midst, gathering strength every day and eating out the vitals of Christianity. I'll conclude with what Anthony Raj says, Father Anthony Raj. We were slaves in Hinduism. We came to Christianity in search of equality, liberty, and brotherhood. Not only you failed to give us freedom, but you force us into the same slavery again. To quote Fray Beto, a Brazilian theologian, who said, I have often asked myself, what is a sin for which there is no forgiveness? I am convinced that sin is to betray the hope of the poor. Thank you.
Thank you, Bishop Deva, for highlighting the plights of the Dalit in India, narrating that touching story, how RSS and the current ruling party treat the Dalit after the Kar Seva incidents. Also, you highlighted Dalitness is actually an inherited inequality, which needs to be challenged. And our constitution is something, Article 17, which very much gives the right to the people to be uplifted. Also, thank you for highlighting the mass movements, the Christian churches, the Dalit churches, which tried to uplift the Dalits, and lots of people joined the churches only to be recognized as people of value. Our Christian values and principle, as the Bible says, in Christ there is neither male nor female, nor Jew nor Greek. All are created in the image of God, which was highlighted through your presentation. It is important that the church continue to work on this within inside as well as outside. Thank you for that powerful sharing, Dr. Deva, from your experience.